Good morning and welcome to Policy Exchange, everybody. Policy Exchange has always had education as a big priority, one of the first things we ever worked on and something that we are continuing to work on today. So a huge pleasure to have the Secretary of State here this morning. And of course, a very timely speech. This week is an important moment in the life of this government. We have not just George Osborne's autumn statement tomorrow, but also the threat of industrial action on Wednesday. And it's that subject, I think, that Michael is going to be talking about this morning. So a huge pleasure to be able to welcome back our former chairman to the building. And thank you for coming here this morning, Michael.
Good morning. Thank you all very much for coming along. And can I say a personal word of thanks to Neil for allowing me to come back to Policy Exchange, the scene of so many happy youthful moments in my political career. But I'm also very grateful to Neil for giving me this platform, because it is, as he was explaining, from many of the ideas that Policy Exchange developed, that the government's agenda for reform has grown. And I just want to say a few words today about the vital importance of continuing with the path of reform in education, and in particular with respect to public sector pensions. Tomorrow, the Chancellor will deliver his autumn statement. It will contain a series of measures to get our economy moving in the right direction, and it will help people, especially young people, get working. But on Wednesday, TUC leaders will call on their members to bring Britain to a halt. Among those union leaders are people who fight hard for their members and whom I respect. But there are also hardliners, militants, itching for a fight. They want families to be inconvenienced. They want mothers to give up a day's work or pay for expensive childcare because schools will be closed. They want teachers and other public sector workers to lose a day's pay in the run-up to Christmas. These people want scenes of industrial strife on our TV screens. They want to make economic recovery harder. They want to provide a platform for confrontation, just when we all need to pull together. And I'm speaking out today because I know what it's like to go on strike, because some people at the top of the union leadership wanted to prove a point. I lost my job, so did more than 100 others. I was lucky, young, unmarried, and without a mortgage. I got another job soon enough. Many others didn't. They never worked again in the profession they loved, and the deal that we were offered before the strike never improved. Today, I want to appeal directly to teachers and other public sector workers. Please, even now, do think again. Think firstly of the uniquely difficult economic circumstances that this country faces. Since John Hutton first reported on the future of pensions, and since we first began negotiating to get a deal, the global economic situation has deteriorated. Growth has slowed everywhere. Nations that spent billions on an economic stimulus plan like America now have growth and unemployment rates similar to ours. Nations that have failed to reform their labour markets, like Spain, have huge unemployment problems, especially youth unemployment problems. And nations that have failed to reform their public sector pension schemes, like Italy and Greece, have lost the confidence of international investors. They've had to pay massive sums just to service their debts, and now they have to contemplate yet more cuts. Even nations that hitherto thought safe, such as France and the Netherlands, are under threat from speculators, and questions are asked about the robustness of their national balance sheets. Britain is in a different position to those Eurozone nations because we took action early to lay out a robust plan, not just to bring our deficit under control by the end of this Parliament, but also to introduce reforms to improve our education system further and make decent public sector pensions sustainable. If we don't stick to that path of reform, if we undermine the credibility that George and Danny have won for our country, then the consequences could be grimmer than many have yet envisaged. If investors think we're not serious about bringing both the deficit and our future liabilities under control, then we could find that interest rates rise to levels where economic recovery is threatened, where businesses pay much more for finance, where new job creation is undermined, where mortgage costs rocket, eating up disposable income and reducing consumption, where much more public spending has to be spent servicing debts, so less is available for schools, the early years, and the NHS. So pension reform isn't a marginal issue. nor is confrontation, protracted wrangling, or a lack of agreement in anyone's interests. And that's why the government, even as the global economic situation has worsened, has been more generous, not less, in its approach to public sector pensions. Because we want agreement. We want a sustainable deal for the future which gives certainty to teachers and others that they will have defined benefits in retirement. And we want to invest as much as possible in the education front line. That's why we've reduced non-frontline expenditure. We're cutting the central costs of administration and DFE by more than a third. We've looked everywhere for economies. We've cut unnecessary travel costs. We've reduced expenditure on first-class rail travel by 90%. While the last government spent £2.46 million on first-class travel in 2009-10, we spent just £265,000 in this year. And we've also sought to limit spending on everything unnecessary. Before I took over at the Department for Education, it was known as the DCSF, and among teachers, it was nicknamed the Department of Curtains and Soft Furnishings. I thought this was just a handy way of manipulating language. It turns out in a way to have been the truth, because in the past year we've only spent £25,000 on new fixtures and fittings in the DFE, but Labour in 2007 to 2008 spent £1.66 million, and then a further £765,000 in 08-09. And in our desire to ensure that there is economy everywhere, we've even got rid of the fruit bowls that used to be delivered to every government minister, and we've sent back the government art. And as well as looking at every area, no matter how small to make savings, we've also made some big, tough decisions to reduce expenditure. Quangos, all with separate boards, communications teams and premises, have either been abolished or have accepted significant cuts. The QCDA, BECTA and the GTCE have gone. The NCSL, TDA and Office of the Children's Commissioner have borne big reductions in spending. And perhaps most painful of all, we had to stop the Building Schools for the Future programme, because it was inefficient, poorly targeted and exceptionally poor value for money. Instead, under Sebastian James, we've developed plans to build schools more cheaply, taking advantage of new technology and reforms of planning rules and regulations. And it's because we took those decisions to show that we were determined to make every penny go further and put the front line first, that the Treasury have been able to prioritise education. Apart from the protected areas of health and international development, education got the best revenue spending settlement in last year's comprehensive spending review. And since then, our shared commitment to reform has helped the Treasury go further. So more has been released to help schools. £600 million more for new free schools, with areas of poverty and population growth prioritised. And £600 million more to help local authorities create more good school places in areas where the population is rising fastest. A problem ignored for years by Labour. And perhaps most crucially of all this week, the arguments that we were able to make about the success of our reform programme on the ground did help the Treasury to release additional funds to improve the pension offer that we're able to make to teachers. And it's really important that teachers appreciate this point. The success of reform, the growth in academies, the more efficient use of resources on the front line, the commitment of the profession to ever higher standards, these have all helped us in government make the case for a better deal for teachers. And the offer that we're making is a good deal. Since becoming Education Secretary, I've been determined to improve the position of the teaching profession. Teachers and heads deserve our support. That's why I've fought for legislative time, to get new laws to strengthen teachers' disciplinary powers. That's why I've reduced the bureaucracy and red tape that teachers face, scrapping bump like the 100-page self-evaluation form, getting rid of the requirement to record every incident when a pupil has to be restrained, and making clear that there's no obligation for every teacher to have a written lesson plan for every lesson. It's also why we face down opposition from vested interests to give teachers anonymity if they face malicious allegations from pupils. It's also why we've reformed inspection in order to make it more responsive to teachers' needs, and we put a teacher back in charge. And it's also why you listen to the profession's legitimate concerns about tests at the end of primary school and reform them. It's also why we've pushed ahead with the Academy programme. Academies give teachers greater control over how they teach, and because money is used more efficiently in academies, teachers in academies enjoy better pay than in other schools. And that same determination to support teachers has driven my personal approach to pension reform, because I'm all too well aware of the feelings of many of my constituents, and many others in the country, about pensions. Under the last government, pensions in the private sector were devastated. Tax changes undermined private pension schemes, occupational pensions were laid waste. There are now very few private sector defined benefit schemes which are still open and which guarantee a fixed income in retirement. In March, the National Association of Pension Funds annual survey found that a record number of final salary pension schemes, 1 in 5, had shut their pensions to both new and existing members. This was a record jump from 7% in the previous survey and just 3% in 2008. Most of these schemes will have already been closed to new joiners. Just 21% of private sector schemes are now open to new joiners, compared with 88% 10 years ago. And a third of schemes are planning changes around their existing members, including cutting benefits or migrating staff to a defined contribution pension. Many of those affected among my constituents and others across the country, including, for example, the people who've been let down by Equitable Life, want additional support from the government. I have to justify to them why we as a government are prioritising instead a good deal for teachers. I do so because I believe that teaching is a noble profession, the most important vocation in the country. But let no one think that there isn't a political cost to safeguarding public sector pensions in this way. There are many citizens working in the private sector who feel short-changed. I understand their concerns, but I also think it's important that we continue to attract the very best young graduates into teaching and retain experienced teachers. I'd like to do more for teachers, and over time, I hope we will. And we will, for example, soon introduce new bursaries and rewards for top graduates in science and maths who train as teachers. But it's important now for me to defend the position that teachers are in. Teachers earn on average the same as other graduates, £34,800 on average, compared to the national average for graduates of £35,900. And teachers and academies earn more. Head teachers and others in leadership positions earn more than other graduates in managerial roles. £55,200 on average for them, compared to £52,600 for other graduates in managerial roles. At a time when some are seeing their earnings in the private sector declining, I want to defend the principle that teachers' salaries should be protected and in due course enhanced. I'll do so at every opportunity, but that depends on all of us together showing that we're not complacent and we're determined to go further in reform and in raising standards. Members of the public, including many of my constituents, argue that teachers enjoy longer holidays and greater employment security than most other workers. But I respond by saying that teaching is physically and emotionally demanding, and given the problems with poor pupil behaviour and the importance of continuity in learning, teachers deserve strong employment protection. And I deploy similar arguments when I'm challenged on the deal that we're now offering teachers on pensions. I say that it's because I think those in the private sector have suffered because of thoughtlessness and the failure to plan ahead by both government and some employers, that we have to protect public sector workers, and teachers especially, from a failure to plan properly now. I believe teachers must have the reassurance that comes from knowing that on retirement they will get a guaranteed income. The government remains committed to ensuring that pensions continue to be index-linked to protect them from inflation. As I say again, there are scarcely 1 million private sector workers in open schemes like that. So it's more important than ever that we defend that security for teachers. And in terms of defending security, we've made some other things absolutely inviolable. Anyone within 10 years of their retirement age, on April the 1st next year, will have their pensions totally protected, entirely unaffected, secure, exactly as before. And all teachers, let me underline that, all teachers will have the money that they've put in and the benefits they've secured totally protected. Accrued rights are untouched. If you've paid in for a number of years at a set rate, in the expectation that will deliver a proportion of your final salary in retirement, that will remain secure. And with inflation at its current levels, let me confirm that pensions will continue to be index-linked. Through thick and thin, the government will bear that risk. But there do need to be changes to ensure that those benefits and other future benefits can be delivered. Because all of us are living longer, and highly educated graduates are living longest of all. So we need to make sure that we can carry on paying pensions to people who will be retired and on retirement incomes for much longer. The number of years that teachers will enjoy in retirement is set expected to rise. The proportion of a teacher's whole lifetime spent in the classroom will shrink, and the proportion of that same life spent in retirement will grow. So we need to take account of that, and we particularly need to take account of the fact that these very welcome increases in life expectancy are proving even greater than the experts predicted. The average 60-year-old can expect to live 10 years longer now than 30 years ago. 40 to 45% of adult lives are now spent in retirement, compared with around 30% for pensioners in the 1950s. Life expectancy in the UK has reached its highest level on record for both men and women. And the number of centenarians in the UK in 2010 is 5 times higher than was estimated in 1980. The percentage of the population aged over 65 has increased from 15% in 1985 to 17% in 2010. That's more than 1.7 million people. And over the same period, the percentage of the population aged under 16 has decreased from 21 to 19%. And the trend is projected to continue. By 2035, 23% of the population will be over 65, compared to 18% aged under 16. Not only is the population aging, but there has been progressive aging of the older population. Most striking has been the increase in the number and proportion of those termed the oldest old. In 1985, there were 690,000 people in the UK aged 85 and over, accounting for 1% of the population. Since then, the numbers have more than doubled, reaching 1.4 million. In comparison to the UK average, the figures for teachers show even greater life expectancy. Between 2004 and 2010, the number of teachers working beyond the age of 60 increased from 9,909 to 31,572. But it's important that we remember that regardless of any changes to teachers' normal pension age or the state pension age, teachers will retain options to retire at any age between 55 and 75. Because in talking about longevity, I have to address one myth that's developed. The idea that I'm asking all teachers to work for longer, indeed insisting that every teacher must be in the classroom until they're 68. That's just not true. And let me go into some detail to explain why. Teachers who joined the Teachers' Pension Scheme prior to 2007 currently have a normal pension age of 60. Those who joined from 2007 have a normal pension age of 65. We're proposing a phased increase in the normal pension age for all teachers to align with the state pension age, currently 65, and due to increase to 68 by 2046. Under our proposals, teachers will still be able to take their pension during that 20-year window from 55 to 75. The annual pension income will vary depending on when teachers choose to retire. But all of the pension they've built up under the current scheme will remain payable in full at either 60 or 65, depending on whether they joined the scheme before or after 2007. Only the pension that teachers build up under the reform scheme would normally be payable at a later age. But you're still free to draw that pension at any point from your 55th birthday. And I should add that the ratio between what you pay in every year and what you get out over time, the accrual rate, has been specifically improved following lobbying from the Departments for Education and Health to ensure that teachers and others are protected. As Lord Hutton, who's naturally keen to defend the last government's record on pensions, has graciously acknowledged, accrual rates, the vital part of the detail of any pension scheme which determine the value of pension rights, have been greatly improved. This will increase the generosity of pension benefits and bring the proposed new scheme very much into line with the arrangements for new recruits that were agreed between the unions and the last government. So what will that mean in practice for teachers? Well, let me take you through a few examples of hard cases. A teacher aged 27 in 2015, who began teaching at 22 and remained a classroom teacher until they retired at a point on the pay scale of U3 at age 68, could expect a pension of £28,000 per annum, £23,000 if they retired at 65, or £16,000 if they retired at 60. A teacher aged 35 in 2015, who'd begun teaching at 25 and retired at age 68 from a leadership post on the point L21, could expect a pension of £37,000 per annum, £31,000 if they retired at 65, or £22,000 by retiring at 60. They would also receive a lump sum of £23,000 at each age. And a teacher aged 49 in 2015, who'd begun teaching at 22 and remained a classroom teacher until they retired on point U3 at age 66, could expect a pension of £23,000 per annum, £22,000 if they retired at 65, or £17,000 by retiring at 60. They would receive a lump sum of £37,000 at each age. The Department for Education has developed a pensions calculator on our website, which allows any teacher to punch in their details and see what they would secure. I encourage all teachers to use it to help them make a judgment about their future benefits. We take our responsibility to keep teachers informed about changes seriously, and so we contacted every teacher in the country directly last week to explain about the reforms in detail. Now, I don't know of any pensions provision in the private sector which can match the current offer in scope, certainty, and generosity. And while I absolutely respect the right of teachers' representatives to negotiate hard, they should in fairness join me in making clear that teachers who opt out of the pension scheme or think that they have to retire now in order to retain their pension rights are not acting in their own best interests. It would be extremely unlikely to be in a teacher's interest to opt out of the teacher pension scheme and seek a private alternative. A private pension plan would almost certainly cost much more in terms of contributions, requiring around 1/3 of salary and contributions to achieve the same level of benefit, without any certainty over final income at retirement. And the current employer contribution to teachers' pensions, 14.1%, is much more generous than they would be likely to get in the private sector. Only 1 in 3 workers in the private sector receive an employer contribution, compared with all teachers, and nearly 9 in 10 in the public sector overall. Now, I know that some teachers, including head teachers, have contemplated leaving the profession early because they're concerned by one of the central changes needed to keep the scheme sustainable. We plan to link future benefits to the average salary earned over a lifetime, rather than the absolutely final salary on retirement. It makes the teachers' pension scheme fairer to all teachers, and as I say, it's critical to making it sustainable. But I understand the concerns expressed, and we are cushioning this change. The move to paying retirement income based on the average salary over the scheme will only apply to service from the date of the change to a new scheme. Teachers will keep all the benefits they've built up in their current pension, and those benefits will still be based on final salary at retirement. So if a teacher retires before these changes, they would actually get a lower pension than they would if they continued to contribute to the scheme. Now, of course, some have taken issue with this reform, and that's why we're still in negotiation, so we can ensure that concerns are heeded and our offer, if necessary, adjusted. But let me make clear, if we're more flexible or generous in one part of the scheme, the weight will have to be borne elsewhere in the scheme. There's no magic pot of gold we can plunder to add huge sums to what we've already offered. I've already secured more from the Treasury. There is now a need for all of us to move to an agreement. Because we've already had an analysis of the sustainability of our commitments from Lord Hutton, an evaluation of our public sector pensions, including the teachers' pension scheme. And he's made it clear they are sustainable only with reform. As Lord Hutton made crystal clear, the increases in life expectancy and the growing number of teacher pensioners are putting a growing strain on other taxpayers. The TPS, like most public service pension schemes, is an unfunded scheme. That means that current pension contributions, both from employees and employers, are used to help offset the cost of paying pensions to current pensioners. But the amount that teachers and employers currently pay together isn't enough to pay pensions for all current pensioners. And without reform, it certainly won't be enough to support future pensioners. The shortfall between contributions received and pensions paid out each year is met from taxes paid by all workers. In 2005, it cost £5 billion to pay teachers' pensions. By 2015, the cost will have risen to £10 billion. So reform is vital if we're to be fair to other taxpayers. But in order to ensure that that reform is fair to all, we've deliberately sought to share the burden in a way that offers the greatest protection to the lowest paid. That's why we've tried to manage the increase in contributions next year in as fair a way as possible. Following an extensive consultation with the unions and others, we've set out a process which reduces the impact on the relatively lower paid. There will be an average contribution increase by 2015 of 3.2% of a teacher's salary in order to reinstate a fairer balance between members' and employers' contributions. but teachers earning between 26,000 and 32,000 will only pay an extra 0.9% in 2012-13. It's higher earners who will pay up to an additional 2.4%, according to their salary. And of course, teachers will continue to receive tax relief on pension contributions, which will reduce the impact of this on their take-home pay. So reform must come. We're all living longer, and it's unfair and unrealistic to expect other taxpayers to cover more and more of that cost and to bear more and more of that risk. The burden must be shared. And at a time when all taxpayers face unprecedented pressure, we have to be fair to all, and we have to continue to prioritise investment in the front line. This week's strikes will not change any of these facts. They will not make tough decisions any easier. But they will force tens of thousands of parents to scrabble around for emergency childcare or plead with their bosses for a day off, and they will deprive children of a day's schooling. I must warn parents that many schools are going to close, the overwhelming majority across the country, north of 90%. But while I'm deeply opposed to this action and the damage it generates, I don't want any rancor to enter this debate, and I don't want to see the professional respect in which teachers are held undermined. So let me stress that I understand why teachers value good pensions and appreciate the concern about the future goes right across the workforce. That's why I got extra money from the Treasury. And let me underline that I want talks to carry on the day after the strike in a constructive way. Agreement is too important. I also know that there will be many teachers and heads who are deeply conflicted, who, whatever they think about the pension proposals, don't like the idea of striking and only do so reluctantly because they do not wish to let down other colleagues. I understand. And I particularly understand that many schools will have to close when the head teacher wants to keep them open. The sheer number of those striking, including support staff, means there aren't enough bodies physically to keep the school open. There are many fantastic heads working incredibly hard to keep their schools open. But no head should be criticised if they have to close their school. It's a professional judgment, and we should leave it to the professionals. But I still hope that teachers will pause and reflect over the next 2 days. This is a good deal, one that millions in the private sector envy. This is a difficult time, when we all have to reflect on the fact that we are all in this together. The success of school reform is increasing the respect and securing the resources that teachers deserve. So before striking, I ask teachers to reflect, what further will be achieved? The government can't afford to abandon the path of reform. Everyone will pay the price. Strikes won't change that. I don't blame union leaders for negotiating hard. That's absolutely right. But there comes a point where we've got to recognise that union leaders are no longer serving their members' best interests if they go out on strike. And I believe that's the case here. So I hope that many people will decide not to strike. But I also hope that on Thursday morning, those who did strike will reflect, think again about our offer, and come to the conclusion that it is indeed a good deal. Because if we don't reach agreement, then change will have to be imposed. The reason that I'm in this job is because I want to ensure that we give the next generation the best possible start in life. It would be wrong to saddle them with increasing public sector debts, unsustainable financial commitments, and unaffordable future promises. That is why, on reform, in our schools, in our economy, in our public finances, there can be no turning back. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you all for coming along, and I'm very, very happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. But I think it would help everyone in the audience, if anyone who wanted to ask a question, to say who they are, and if appropriate, if they represent an organisation, hear from a newspaper, a union, an employers group, or an interested party in any way.
Who wants to go first? We take maybe a bunch of questions, a gentleman over on the left, and then you.
Greg Hurst from The Times. Who are these union hardline militants who are leading the strike? Are they leaders of teaching unions, or are you saying the teaching unions are being led astray by others in the TUC? And also, why did you improve the offer to teachers and to others at an advanced stage of balloting, where many of the unions were in the process of balloting, particularly the NAHT. If you were serious about a deal, why not do it before the ballot had been cast? One other thing, is it right, as the ATL is saying, that teachers in independent schools will have to leave the teachers' pension scheme?
3 points there. The first, who are the militants? I do not hang that badge around any teaching union leader, but I think you need to only look at the words of Len McCluskey in The Guardian today, or consider the conduct of Mark Sawatka throughout this dispute, or look at the political record of Mr. Andrew Murray, who's a lead official in Unite, to recognise that militant is a badge that fits for all of those three. On the second point, about the improved offer that we made, we've been negotiating, I hope in good faith, throughout with all of the teaching unions. And I stress again, the teaching union general secretaries and the negotiators, while obviously they've made a very strong case in public, have also been constructive and pragmatic in private. And we've responded to that constructive and pragmatic approach by coming forward with a better offer. As the Chief Secretary to the Treasury made clear, it's because we were able to demonstrate success in our reform agenda that we were able to convince the Treasury that this additional money was money wisely invested. I'm not sure every union figure would necessarily acknowledge that, but it's important for me to state it. There was no desire to disrupt any balloting procedure, but there is of course naturally desire, as you will have seen from my speech, to ask people to think again. And I entirely understand why unions will have had to conduct ballots according to a particular timetable in order to make sure that they had flexibility over whether or not to go on strike. That's fair enough, that's part of the armoury of techniques that any trade union will use. But now that the ballot has been concluded, and this offer is on the table, and there's a chance for reflection, I hope that strikes won't go ahead. And on the final point about the teachers in the independent fee-paying sector, it is the case that Lord Hutton explicitly argued that teachers in the independent fee-paying sector should be excluded. I have been talking to colleagues across government because I want to make sure that as many teachers as possible benefit from the protection of the teachers' pension scheme. And it is one of a number of parts in the negotiation, but I have absolutely no desire to make life more difficult for any member of the teaching workforce.
Ian. Ian Watson from the BBC. You make the case here for pension reform, but there's a poll today which suggests nearly 2/3 of respondents blame the government for the strikes rather than unions. Why aren't you winning the argument? And secondly, when you mentioned in the speech there's some room for potential further adjustment, where do you think the government could go further to address union concerns?
As to winning the public argument, I think a lot depends on how you ask the question. So there are different opinion polls that come up with different results at different times. But ultimately, while, like every politician, I read opinion polls, I'm not very good at interpreting them. I leave that to political commentators. That is an art I no longer practice, and I wasn't particularly good at it when I did it. My aim is to try to put the case for reform, and I hope that teachers will reflect on what we've said today and reflect on the broader deal that we're offering. As for room for adjustment, let me stress that is adjustment within the offer that we have made. So there are a number of variables, as the union negotiators are aware. The accrual rate, the normal pension age, the phasing. I'm anxious to engage constructively in order to ensure that we can shift resources from point A to point B in order to seek to help. But there is no additional pot of gold that I can magic significant additional resources from.
Kevin Schofield from The Sun. These strikes are going to go ahead. These strikes are going to go ahead on Wednesday on the back of relatively low turnouts at union ballots. Are you among those in favour now of reforming the strike laws so that any strikes need the backing of more than 50% of the workforce?
I think we need to look at all the laws governing industrial relations and ask ourselves the question, how do we balance the right of individuals to withdraw their labour, which is a basic civil right, from the responsibility that the government has to ensure that public services are maintained. One of my particular concerns is that you do not have to give notice directly to your employer that you will go on strike. You need simply inform them on the day that you are taking strike action. And I think that appropriate contingency planning in many cases is made more difficult by that. And I'm not doing that because I'm seeking confrontation. As I say, I would like to be in a position where we can reach agreement. On the question of ballot thresholds, again, Francis Mort has made it clear that we keep all union legislation under review. But I will acknowledge that if you look at the number of teachers who voted, it is clear that there is concern about the pensions offer, and that's why the government has taken the steps that it has.
Dave Skelton from Policy Exchange. We've published a new report this morning, and one of the arguments in there is the system of national pay bargaining can act as an obstacle to the creation of private sector jobs in areas that are heavily dependent on the public sector. Just wondering what your thoughts were about the impact of national pay bargaining.
Well, not only has Policy Exchange done some work in this area, Professor Alison Wolfe has done some work on this area, which is provocative and thought-provoking. If that's not tautologist. I shouldn't be drawn into that debate. One thing I would say is that the comparison that I drew between the average salary of a graduate in the private sector and the average salary of a graduate in the public sector will mask the fact that graduates in the private sector in some parts of the country, for example the North East, will be earning proportionately less. The national pay bargaining will mean that teachers everywhere, apart from those who obviously are rightly benefit from an inner London waiting, will be on broadly the same level. So there will be some parts of the country and some groups of schools where teachers who are graduates will be earning more than comparable people in the private sector who are graduates. And I think in the broader debate it's important that all of us reflect on that.
Hi, Constantine Monticus. Michael, you've talked a lot about sort of teachers' rights. Just 2 seconds on obligations. I mean, in the last few weeks, I've had a number of job applications sent to me from UK graduates riddled with basic spelling errors. These are 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds, good degrees, good universities. Their comparable peers on the continent would never have that. I mean, is that something that is exercising you just as much as pension rights?
Well, the reason I'm speaking today is because on pension rights is that there is going to be a strike on Wednesday. I'd rather not spend most of my time and the Department's energy negotiating on pensions, but it's important because it matters to teachers. But what I'm seeking to say today is exactly as you say, that as Education Secretary I have a double role. It's my job to grapple with the Treasury, to defend the position of teachers, and indeed to seek to push through legislation to make the position of teachers stronger. But at the same time, I also expect of everyone in the school system rising standards year on year. And I think that for exactly the reasons that you've mentioned, because we're in a globally competitive jobs market, we've got to do that. There is one union, the NASUWT, that has argued that the expectation that standards will rise every year is an unfair burden on teachers. I think that's wrong. I think that they should be, as a professional association that has done a lot of good in the past, arguing that every year they will work with government and with parents to raise standards. And you're absolutely right, the two halves of the equation come together. Absolutely defend teachers' position and do your best for them, but at the same time work positively with them to make sure that some of the weaknesses in our education system that you quite rightly draw attention to are addressed and soon.
Just about to run out of time. I just wonder if there's any last questions in the room. Oh, there's two. Let's take these last two together, and then we have.
Just a comment really there, John McVitie, the head teacher of Woodside, and also the president of ASCL, Association of School and College Leaders. We have not balloted our members yet for strike action. That doesn't mean that we're not very, very concerned about teachers' pensions, etc. But I would just like to thank Michael for his comments, because my school will be partially closed this week, because health and safety reasons we won't have enough staff in to manage. And I would like to thank you for mentioning that you would like empathy for those head teachers who are trying to manage, and also for those teachers who equally feel that they do have to go out on strike. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Bernadette Brooks from NACE, which is the ICT Association. Michael, as a former teacher, I welcome your comments about the professionalisation. You didn't use that phrase, but I can see it in there. And I think as a former teacher and working with so many colleagues in the teaching profession, you know, they too welcome that. And aside from the pension question, which they do feel very strongly for, we all understand that, they're very concerned to be recognised as a profession. And I again welcome your comments on that. As the ICT Association, I'm just wondering that there are lots of schools who use technology well, and last year when we had the terrible snow, many schools were able to continue learning when the children couldn't get to school and the teachers couldn't get there either. And I'm just wondering how many schools and how we can encourage schools to use their technology well this week, so that the children that we all really are in this profession to serve, don't lose out on the learning opportunity. And we're very keen to promote the best use of technology in education, and we seek your support in doing that. So, do you have any comments?
Well, I'm grateful for both comments. And as I say, I want to underline that there will be people who will be deeply conflicted, who may, in the end, decide that they can't go to work, possibly because the majority of their friends and colleagues are striking. And I don't want any rank. I think it's a mistake, but I don't want any rancour to enter into the relationship, and it's the same with head teachers. Many of them will be trying to keep their school open, but will know that they have to the very next day work with all those who walked out. Some of them will be close friends and colleagues, so it's important that we in that respect, show understanding of the position, even as we believe that it's wrong. ICT has a huge role to play. I think technology will be playing a larger and larger role in how we make our schools work more effectively in the future. I'll be saying more about that soon, but it's absolutely right, yes, that both teachers and students can work from home with the imaginative use of technology, and I hope in the future we'll be able to make it clear how the better use of technology can help parents become more involved in their children's education, can help children learn faster, and make sure that assessment is better designed to be in their interests.
I think with that, we are, I'm afraid, out of time. Michael, thank you for making time in your busy schedule to come and talk to us today. You've all asked great questions. Michael, your speech was incredibly interesting and full of fascinating facts, including about that teachers live longer, which is a miracle to me, given how much all of mine was smoked. So thank you for making time this morning, and it only really remains for us to thank you in the conventional way. Thank you.